This advice is keeping most women stuck and frustrated, and you've likely heard it before. Eat less, move more. Now, in today's show, I want to show you exactly why that backfires and how hormones get involved, along with how I handle this with clients and what I do with it instead to help them to break free from this cycle for good and essentially flip the script. Before we even get started, obviously I'm sure you're wondering, who the hell even am I and why should you listen to me? My name is Gavin Scribolito and I am a male functional health coach, and I primarily work with women to help them to understand their bodies and to essentially stop fighting their bodies. And I've worked with over 200 women now to help them completely transform their body, optimize their hormone and their gut health, and boost their metabolism so that way they can see the results that they want and have been striving for years and actually maintain them at the same time. Now, I do have a mission that I am striving for just in the overall industry of health and fitness, and that is essentially to really make macros, health, nutrition, fitness, hormone balance, and gut health sound simpler, sound more doable, and especially for that busy woman who has essentially felt like she has tried everything and just still feels stuck and frustrated. Now, I do have a lens of practice that I usually will implement. This is what we have used with all of our clients to help them to go from point A to point B and stay at point B for the rest of their lives, unless they want to obviously change their goals maybe. But that method is called the ROOT method. It stands for recover, optimize, overcome, and transform. Now, this is what really mixes science with empathy and real life application over just fads and, short-term overall protocols. That essentially is really where a lot of women are getting stuck. Now, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this whole show and what the entire topic is going to be around, which, like I said, is why eat less and move more is misguiding women. And a lot of this really comes down to three main touch points: adaptive metabolism, the stress response it has on your body, and the behavior backlash theory. Now, within these three scopes, this is really going to explain in pretty great detail why this method is not actually practical for respectively anybody. But let's start with adaptive metabolism. What even is that? How do you even understand that? And what does that even mean? Simply put, our bodies are always going to adapt to the environment that we place it in. Think of any situation where you've been placed and you've had to adapt to that situation, whether it be a work environment or a life situation, whether it be mental, emotional, or physical. Your body is always going to adapt. So if we put our body into a state where it is underfed and overtrained, it's going to adapt to that as well in ways that we're likely not going to like. Now, what happens is if calories go down, movement goes up. In regards to training, what happens is your body's going to start to try to conserve energy anywhere that it can. That might mean that non-exercise activity might naturally go down. That could look like things that I'm doing with my hands right now, little fidgeting. Obviously, the urge or desire to move more throughout the day will likely go down too, especially if your recovery is impaired. You're likely not going to want to move very much. So your overall non-exercise activity, so things like you're walking, again, you're fidgeting, movement throughout the day is likely going to down-regulate. Your body's going to conserve energy that way. Things that we likely will also see is that your training quality is going to drop. Okay, you're also likely probably cutting carbs at this time, which will lead your body to be more glycogen depleted. Glycogen, if you're unsure of what that is how our body stores glucose coming from carbohydrates, or maybe sometimes other sources. But mostly carbohydrates. So if our muscle stores, which our muscle stores glycogen, are depleted, obviously your muscles are going to be left with less energy to actually be able to properly contract. You're going to notice you're probably less, you have decreased strength in the gym, and you probably feel more fatigued, weaker, more tired. And this is where your body's also, again, going to conserve energy. It's going to lead you to not be able to push as hard in the gym. So now your training is going to start to likely probably dwindle. And unless you're someone that literally can push past that or is over caffeinating and stimming themselves out to get past that, this is likely going to be more of a debilitating response. We also have hunger and food focus rise. A lot of women come to me with a lot of food noise and they wonder why they can't beat it. This is the whole craze around Ozempic and, Mounjaro right now, is that it decreases food noise because it completely blunts your appetite as a whole. And this is really stemming from this constant urge of being super low calorie. We have people on 1,200 calorie diets, or even worse. There's some diets that are like 800 calories and they have like shakes and supplements that they give you. And no wonder your food noise and your hunger and your cravings are going through the roof, because you are literally starving your body. And your body is trying to fight for itself to survive this. And whenever you're feeling that food noise and those cravings, it's because your body is urging you to eat to survive. Your body's main goal is survival, and that's what we're seeing here. Now, we also have a stress response that this is going to have on your body. This can start to obviously have a little bit of a backlash of its own. When there's over-restriction and overtraining present, what is going to happen is that that's going to push cortisol up. If you are unaware of cortisol at this time, please, I urge you to, actually, I don't urge you to go on social media and look it up, because you'll be completely and utterly just in disarray of people pushing supplements down your throat of how to reduce your cortisol. It's heavily marketed now in the social space. But cortisol is your circadian hormone. It's also your stress hormone, okay? When cortisol gets pushed up and it stays elevated, okay? Acute spikes of cortisol are healthy. Training is going to acutely spike cortisol. We have a cortisol awakening response in the morning that wakes us up. The problem arises when it stays up, when it does not come back down. This is going to affect a lot of hormones in the body. Specifically, one that plays a really big role in energy metabolism is going to be thyroid. Your thyroid output and conversion is going to downregulate. Your thyroid plays a massive role in mitochondrial health, which is obviously the powerhouse of your cell that creates ATP, aka energy. So if thyroid conversion and overall production goes down, and we see downregulation in that hormone and that overall gland, well, now you're going to be left even more tired, and that's going to obviously start to really impact your metabolism and slow things down. Okay, we also are going to see at that point likely fat loss is going to stall even with effort. I see this time and time and again. Now, the behavior backlash theory is where I feel a lot of women really get stuck. And that's the binge and restrict cycle that a lot of women tend to get stuck in, where you're good all week and then you hit the weekend and it's like all hell breaks loose. It's the restriction, the guilt, the shame, and then we repeat. And this is where I find a lot of women are kind of self-sabotaging without even maybe being super aware of it. Now, I don't want to, invalidate anyone who has been putting in all of the effort and still not seeing results for it, because that is very common. I have had clients that I have worked with that I know for a fact were doing everything right. We were tracking everything super meticulously. We were on top of every variable, and progress still wasn't happening. Lo and behold, every one of those clients, we got blood work done, and we really saw that there was something going on underneath the surface that we had to address. But at the end of the day, I've also had plenty of women come to me that have explained that they feel like they're doing everything. After going through a series of some questions, we come to find out they're not. They're tending to try to be too over-restrictive, and that's leading to moments where they're binging. And the problem is that they're super hyper-fixated on the moments where they're being restrictive, that they're almost dissociating in the moments where they are overeating and they are binging. They try to kind of block it out of their mind because obviously it doesn't feel good. It's shame, it's guilt. So they hyperfixate on the restriction part of it. That's what makes them feel like they're doing everything. And then they kind of are just like, ignoring the fact that this keeps happening. But that is obviously a very common issue here. Now, what I want to kind of tie this into here now is obviously how this is going to hit and affect female hormones and your metabolism. And this comes down to a few mechanisms, some that I've already brought up a little bit. But the first one is going to be your cortisol and the relationship with thyroid. Like I mentioned, high stress hormones is going to make the body feel essentially unsafe. Okay, it's going to make the body know that, like, hey, we're in an environment that doesn't feel safe. We don't feel like we are protected right now. Keep in mind, our bodies don't really know the difference between you just got a bill in the mail that literally just stressed you out, or you have a really crazy day and you're going from point A to point B to point C to point D, or you're looking at a saber-toothed tiger. There's no difference. Your body's response is going to be the same. cortisol spike, it goes into fight or flight. Okay, and nowadays in modern day society, we have so many fight or flight responses from situations that we are put into that your body is very easily susceptible to staying in that fight or flight response. And what's going to happen is that's going to obviously drastically impact the thyroid conversion, and the thyroid hormone, which, like I mentioned, is going to play a massive role in your overall energy metabolism and your mood. It also can obviously affect gut health as well. A lot of times we will see downregulation in thyroid, and we'll also see slowed gut motility. So now you can feel more constipated. That can start to roll over into actually affecting your cycle and your hormones, because if we're constipated, that is how your body metabolizes estrogen, is through your stool. So if we're not going to the bathroom as much, we have recirculating estrogen in the body that can start to impact PMS symptoms and start to impact your cycle fertility as a whole. So again, that is just one piece of the puzzle, but you can see how the cascade starts to really unfold into some negative pathways. Now, we also have blood sugar and cravings. Okay. Poor sleep especially is going to ramp this up. Okay, it's going to decrease insulin sensitivity, increase the possibility for insulin resistance, which, again, if you are unaware of that, insulin resistance is essentially your cells in your body are no longer receptive to insulin because it has been so present for so long due to that decreased insulin sensitivity, and also likely the increase of blood sugar due to the constant cortisol spikes, because cortisol is going to free up stored glucose in the body and pump it through its system. So we have obviously the factor of it decreasing insulin sensitivity. We also have the increased craving and hunger aspect that might lead to more grazing, more snacking. Obviously, you might have more sugary cravings as well along with that, because your body's essentially having these blood sugar swings and crashes, and it wants to constantly re-up that. So we see a lot of that. You also have, obviously, like I had mentioned, your cycle health and your gut health, and how those are intrinsically connected. You have constipation, bloating, mood swings, and irregular cycles. The body is essentially, if you're at that stage already, your body is waving a red flag to slow down and refuel. Okay, that is like essentially, if you can kind of think, for a lot of women, the cycle irregularities is usually one of like the last parts that I've noticed. It's like usually it's the cravings, it's the mood, it's a little bit of like the decreased metabolism. We have obviously the thyroid, which is usually much more easily influenced by, food coming in or energy output. That's usually one of the first hormones that gets downregulated, if we're talking about like what that kind of stepping process looks like. And then usually downstream, we have it eventually impacting your cycle and fertility. Because essentially what we have to keep in mind is that as a female, your body's main concern is to reproduce. So if your body feels unsafe to even protect you and keep you safe, it's going to obviously not feel protected to keep a baby and you safe. If you can't even feed your own body, and your body can't even be able to maintain its own energy balance, how is it going to support a baby's energy balance and your own? So fertility, it makes sense in that regard as to why that is going to drop, because of that simple mechanism that your body is not feeling safe, and it's not going to want to, grow a child, or won't even be able to grow a child in a healthy manner. So fertility is going to drop. And you see this oftentimes in women that have low progesterone. Sometimes it might look like also estrogen dominance, which could be elevated estrogen and like moderate or low progesterone, or it could just be progesterone tanked out and moderate estrogen. That's usually one of the more prevalent, mechanisms that we kind of see in lab work. Now, I want to kind of reframe this a little bit here and like give you a quick idea of what an actual responsive metabolism needs. And the first one it needs is, you guessed it, safety. It needs safety. It needs fuel. It needs to know that it is being well fed and it's not in a famine state. And that looks like consistent energy availability, enough carbs and protein to support thyroid and your training and recovery. That's what's going to really make a massive change in obviously how your body is perceiving the situation going on. Instead of thinking it's in a famine, because your body doesn't know you have a fridge full of food, it just knows what it's getting from that fridge. So we have to keep that in mind. You have progressive training and optimal recovery. Okay, lifting to get stronger as opposed to just trying to burn calories. Massive difference there. You have walking daily. You have intentional deloads that you plan into your training. That might look like, a week where you decrease your reps in reserve or your RPE, which if you're unsure of what that is, that's basically like your rate of perceived exertion. So like how hard you're training. Reps in reserve is like how many reps you're leaving in the tank on certain sets. So if you're training to failure, that would be like a reps in reserve of 0. If you're not training to failure, that might look like, how many, like if you hit 12 reps, you might, you could have got 15, that would be a reps in reserve of 3. So obviously the lower those reps in reserve and the higher that RPE is, the more intense your training is. And, if you are doing that consistently without intentional deloads, where you're even taking like, a kind of pull back on that RPE and leaving more reps in reserve, or you're intentionally taking extra days off from the gym, that can start to really cause a problem and, systemic inflammation throughout the body. Gut health can be impaired. Obviously, we can see that show up in thyroid, your reproductive cycle, so on and so forth. Obviously, the more that you keep chasing doing more for the sake of doing more, think of it like if you obviously are going to work, right? It sounds great in theory to like work extra or work overtime or overnights or, try to make extra money, right? And you might feel great when you get that paycheck. But at the end of the day, what is that doing to you? You're likely feeling burnt out, you're fatigued, you're wondering why you're depressed or super stressed out, and it's because you're burning yourself out, right? So if you wouldn't work every single day and go crazy into work to make more money, because the effect it's going to have on you, why are we doing that with your health? Why are we doing that with your body when we know that that's going to affect you in a negative way? And a lot of women don't understand this. This isn't really, taught in a lot of the social media space by many people or even personal trainers, so it's very unfortunate. But lastly here, we have also the regulating your nervous system. This is probably one of the most important parts here, okay? So that could look like sleep, it could look like breath work, it could look like daily sunlight, especially first thing in the morning to really set that cortisol awakening response. That's very important. And a sane caffeine intake is really what's going to set you up for a, overall successful fat loss phase, okay? Those are like regulating your nervous system. I always say this to clients, like, fat loss is much more of a mental and emotional battle than it really is a physical one. I know I'm going over a lot of physical attributes, but keep in mind the mental and emotional side of things is likely what's causing these problems in the first place. It's your behaviors based on how you feel mentally and emotionally. Restricting and binging is an emotional response. We have obviously the emotions rise when we maybe don't see progress on the scale. That might lead you to restrict yourself further or train harder. On the flip side of things, some people will binge because of that and they'll completely self-sabotage themselves. So the more you can regulate your nervous system, your emotional state, your mental state, you're going to see more success. And the clients who I work with who do that and we work through those obstacles, they see 10 times more progress because of that. And they see consistent progress and they never regress from that progress. Now, as with anything, I am never going to leave you without any, actionable steps to actually take out of this show. So I want to kind of go through 3 main tips that I use with clients to help to actually break this pattern. So that way they can actually heal, they can properly fuel their body, and they can feel good at the same time while also reaching their goals. Because if you maybe, forgot, this is about feeling better in your body, not necessarily just about, pushing and pushing to try to just achieve a certain physique look that you're going for. Like, we can do that and feel good at the same time. And that's the whole name of the goal. Now, step 1 is recovering the base. So your body says yes. Right now, it's like, hell no, because it doesn't feel safe, right? So we need to recover that. That is going to look like setting a good sleep target, 7.5 to 9 hours minimum, cut caffeine late, anchor in a good wind down routine. That's crucial. We also want to make sure we're pulling training back to the minimum effective dose here. That's likely going to look like at least 3 to 4 lifts. I would probably recommend doing this for a minimum of 2 to 4 weeks if you have been in a state of, this is actually coined, it's called Red S. It's basically, it's relative energy deficiency syndrome. I could have the R wrong, but basically it's when you are in a state of an energy deficit for too long. That could look like from overtraining or under eating. Your body's going to make a lot of these shifts that I just pointed out to you here. And, the longer you're in that state for, the longer you're going to need time away from those activities. So if you're someone that's been here for maybe a year or more, which I do have clients that come to me in this state for over a year, then that might look like, dropping that effective training dose down to 3 to 4 lifts for much longer than 2 to 4 weeks. That could look like sometimes 3 to 6 months. depending on, again, the severity of, how long you've been in that state for. Now, I want to emphasize that this also could look very different for a lot of women that are doing different types of training modalities. I have worked with a lot of women who do a lot of high intensity interval training, and I see this more prevalently with them, where they're doing that 4 to 6 times a week. And that amount of training volume, intensity, and also a combination of cardio and lifting is really going to set the floor for metabolic dysfunction, hormone imbalance, and gut health issues. Being the fact that it's much more difficult to recover from. And a lot of those women, I'd venture to say, also aren't sleeping the greatest. They have a lot of other life stressors going on. And although it might feel great to come out of that session and feel good because of the intensity of it, we have to keep in mind that just because it feels mentally good to have had a hard workout doesn't mean that it's physically good for your body. So, that might require you to change your training modality up. I've had to do this with a lot of women where I've had to kind of pull down the HIIT, increase the strength training, pull down the cardio, and increase more step counts to really kind of flip that script again to get their bodies to actually start to feel safer and heal again. I think that minimum should be probably 2 to 3 rest days a week, depending on, again, the severity of that state of red S that you have been in. Now, 2 nervous system cues daily, I think, is very crucial here. That could look like 5-minute box breathing. It could also look like 10 minutes of morning sunlight or a short walk to start your day. Really get your cortisol awakening response into a better range. But this also would look like things before bed. I'm a huge advocate of setting a nighttime routine up. This kind of goes hand in hand with the sleep, of making sure that you have at least a 15 to 30 minute wind down window before bed. That could look like reading. That could look like meditation, breath work. It could look like a little stretching or a yoga session to connect with your body. It could look like progressive muscle relaxation, where you lay in bed and you tense a muscle and you release it as you breathe, and you kind of move it up and down your body, relaxing yourself, controlling your breathing. In some moments we might need adaptogen support, so this is where maybe throwing something like a ashwagandha or a rhodiola or holy basil might be helpful as a supplement to aid in that process if you are somebody who has a really stressful life, or if you have been confirmed to have elevated or also low cortisol, depending on the state of your adrenal glands. That can obviously really point to possibly needing adaptogen support. Also really helpful, vitamin mineral status could obviously be things like magnesium, L-glycine, L-theanine. Those are all, that's a great kind of sleep stack, so to speak, that can help a lot with promoting better sleep. Now, for step number 2, or tip number 2, we have optimizing your food for hormones and performance. So this will look like setting your calories near realistic maintenance. And again, the severity of this is going to be really dependent on how long you have been away from a maintenance state for. So again, in that red S state, where, if we have been there for, again, a year or so, or maybe 6 months or more, that might look like we have to do a little bit longer of this. But setting your calories near realistic maintenance for at least 4 to 6 weeks, again, longer if you have been in this state for longer, before we even think of any deficit again, right? Bringing your protein to roughly about 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight is also very helpful. So if you're a 140-pound female, that might look like anywhere from give or take 120 to 140 grams, depending on where you're even at right now. Keep that in mind. If you're barely consuming that, we probably should just kind of gradually increase maybe by 20 to 30 grams, every couple of weeks, and see how you feel. If you need help calculating your caloric intake and where you should be as far as the maintenance goes, I do have a calorie calculator in my bio of my Instagram. You can click that. You can find that there to help get yourself an idea of where you might be at for a caloric intake wise, relative to also where you're at now. Keep that in mind. If you're barely consuming 1,200 calories and your maintenance says that you're at 19, obviously not very realistic to jump from 1,200 to 19. You have to gradually reverse diet yourself up to that point. And this is where having a coach could be more beneficial. This is where I really, usually will advocate to get help with that, to make sure that you are going through that smoothly and surely, because it's a lot of mental and emotional things you have to overcome, and there's fears that are going to come up with that, and it's understanding how to look for progress and see that you're making progress in those regards, what to look for, how to keep your mind in a level state. There's a lot of things to really look for that I think would be crucial and can really make a massive difference between doing it on your own and having a coach that can help navigate you with that. You'll make a lot more progress that way. Last one here for optimizing food is going to be a plate formula. Setting yourself up with the plate method, I think, is a great way to start. You're going to have more balanced meals, choosing protein first, choosing a good solid size. I like to also use the hand method with clients if they're not tracking macros, which I do advocate to track your macros and calories and actually weigh things out with a food scale. Some people will look at that as an eating disorder. I look at it as educative. I think that when you actually look at adequate portions and you kind of weigh things out and you understand how a actual filling and satisfying meal looks like for you on a plate. It's going to massively change the game for you. That's how you learn to not just diet for the sake of starving yourself, but dieting for the sake of satiety and making yourself feel full. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients tell me when they start, they're like, wow, I never thought I'd actually, not feel hungry while I'm dieting, because they're actually choosing the right foods. They're filling their plate up and keeping it balanced. So like protein first, choosing like a color that could look like fruit or a vegetable with each meal. And then obviously some more fibrous dense carbs, things like potatoes, oats, quinoa, any sort of grains like, rice, brown rice, anything like that can be very, very helpful. Measuring fats to make sure you're not over consuming those is very helpful too. 3 to 4 meals a day is a good place to start. And this is really what's going to prevent that, weekday starvation and then the weekend chaos. Now that kind of takes me into how to overcome, and this is the third step, the binge and restrict loop. So that way we can be able to actually not lead down a path where you are self-sabotaging your own results. And this comes down to just a really simple structure. Some non-negotiables might look like steps, protein at each meal, consistent bed and wake times, and all things that essentially we want to be able to do even on the messiest days. I always tell clients, hope for the best, but plan for the worst. If you think a situation might pan out a certain way, and you maybe if you get home at time, you'll be able to have lunch, even if you think 100% be back in time and I'll be able to have my lunch. Guess what? Plan for the worst possible scenario. Plan a lunch that you can bring with you on the road, because just in case you can't get back, you don't want to be stuck in a situation where you maybe have to go out to eat, if you weren't planning to already, or where you maybe are going to have to skip that meal and now you're going to come home and ravenously eat your pantry after you have dinner, or you're going to have more than one serving because you're ravenously hungry. These are situations that are obviously going to start to roll down that path of unintentional binging and restricting, because you're not setting yourself up for success. I think weekend planning done on Friday is crucial. So actually getting an idea of what does your weekend look like. Are you going to be out of the house? Are you going to be, going out to dinner? Are you going to be going out with friends at all? How can we set you up for success like that, right? If you're logging your calories, which again, I would advocate for, this would likely look like planning your day ahead of time, picking out portions, looking at what restaurant you're going to go to and being able to kind of get an idea of what would you maybe want, and then backtracking your day from there. Maybe having more fruit and vegetables with meals as carbs and lower fat and higher protein to be able to kind of budget your calories, so to speak, so you can be able to, be a little bit more lenient later on, as opposed to having to go out and be super restrictive, right? There's so many ways we can go about that to plan for that. But essentially what this is going to do is it's going to break that whole starting over on Monday kind of trend. And it just really comes down to making sure you are setting yourself up for success and planning accordingly. Same way you're planning your day out in general, of knowing what you're doing going into that day, you need to plan out your day as far as nutrition to be able to match that to what your day looks like. Now, I think we also need to kind of audit your stress and time. And this is the last point here, is identifying the 2 biggest stressors and picking one simple swap. So that could look like trading that 5th workout for maybe 30 minutes of mobility and breath work. That could even look like yoga, one simple swap that you can kind of make here. And that could look like identifying whatever your biggest stressor is. If it's not training, maybe it's the fact that you're not getting to bed on time, right? How can we set you up to get to bed on time? If you're not falling asleep easily or you're not staying asleep, that could come down to a cortisol problem, or it could just come down to what you're doing before bed. If you're on your phone, if you're watching TV, these are things that are not setting you up for success. They're setting you up for failure. So being able to say hey, I'm going to implement this one habit tonight and I'm going to see how this feels. You don't have to think long-term spectrum of how you have to do this for the rest of your life, but just think hey, if I do this now, what's going to happen? Experiment with yourself, see what helps and what doesn't help. And then you can kind of graduate from there. Now, what I want to really emphasize is that this right here, what I just gave you, is the root method in action. This is where we recover first, we optimize your nutrition, we overcome those stress and mindset loops that are keeping you stuck, and we transform your body with smart training. The scale is going to eventually move, and then you're going to start to feel human again. This is where we start to really address the root cause of why you are stuck, not just give a blanket term statement of, oh, you just need to eat less and move more, because that is not something that was likely meant for your ears. Maybe somebody that maybe is not doing any of these things, but if you're already in a state where you're doing a lot of things and you're already probably pushing the envelope a little bit too, hard, or you're kicking the can down the road too far, and then you're told to eat less and move more, that is, very debilitating advice for somebody that is in that state of red S, or relative energy deficiency syndrome. Now, I I want to give you a quick little actionable takeaway and a step for you, the listener, if you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening to this on audio. But I want you to choose one non-negotiable for the week. It could be a sleep window, a protein target, a daily walk, essentially something that is going to break that, eat less, move more spiral for at least even just 14 days, again, to see how you feel, see what changes, right? Fuel your training, keep your steps steady, and notice that, your cravings and energy change. That's the most important part. We really want to base this off of how are you feeling, not just, how are you looking. This is where we're going to start to kind of break that whole pattern of, I'm doing this to just look this way. We're doing this to feel how you want to feel. Like, how do you really want to feel? That's a question you have to ask yourself. Now, if today's episode gave you any sort of clarity, please subscribe on your favorite platform so you never miss an episode. Share this with a friend or a coworker who keeps trying to eat less and move more, but maybe is feeling stuck. A simple share can really help them and change the game for them. And if you learned something, please leave a quick rating and a 1-sentence review with your biggest takeaway. It helps more women to find this show. Take a screenshot, tag me on Instagram if you can as well, and tell me one of your non-negotiables this week. I tend to read every message. I promise you that. And any resources and next steps would be in the description below. And I appreciate you for being here. You are built better. I'll see you next one.